It is COVID mania throughout New South Wales as the coronavirus cluster has continued to grow. There were up to 111 total cases in the last week, and 2 such cases are locally acquired but from an unknown source. Both of these unknown cases come from the Waverley local government area, which itself has been in lockdown for an extended period. The large concern with this outbreak is that the cases are of the Delta strain, which originated in India. This strain appears to be far more infectious than the other strains, and hence the term fleeting contact cases has been used. There are concerns that this strain may be able to transmit in as short as 5 seconds, as opposed to 15 minutes with the other strains. However, it has been reported by the Sydney Morning Herald on Friday that there is not yet enough evidence to confirm whether this is correct. Dr. Mike Ryan, the director of the World Health Organization's Health Emergencies Program, has acknowledged the possibility that the virus has mutated to become, quote, fitter. And this is due to what is known as the law of declining virulence, whereby all viruses become more transmissible but less pathogenic over time. Ed Fale and Christian Yates of Bath University have described that from an evolutionary perspective, it makes no sense for a pathogen to harm the host on which it depends for its survival. According to this reasoning, virulence is little more than a temporary evolutionary imbalance. So to simplify this, throughout the life cycle of a virus, it will become more transmissible but less dangerous in order for it to survive. So this is what we have seen with many viruses in the past, and we may be beginning to see this take place with the coronavirus through the many strands which are appearing. Following these outbreaks, we have seen increased measures by the governments of each state in order to try and contain the virus. As New South Wales has experienced the brunt of this cluster, New South Wales has entered total lockdowns for a fortnight. Prime Minister Scott Morrison has assessed this decision by the Premier as difficult but necessary. However, there has come more harsh criticism from other sources. This has included questions being raised over whether the lockdown was delayed for political purposes. This was expressed in an article on the ABC. They noted that a day after the budget, last Wednesday, the mood in the government had changed and tough restrictions came into force as the number of COVID cases linked to the Bondi cluster grew. So keep in mind that before this, the New South Wales government was touting how they had ensured freedom better than the other states for their citizens. Residents in 7 local government areas throughout Sydney had their movements restricted and were effectively barred from entering Queensland, New Zealand, South Australia, Western Australia and Victoria. Yet, some in the government, including Health Minister Brad Hazzard, were adamant that there was no need to consider a lockdown. This is all from the ABC article. Then on Friday, residents in 4 Sydney local government areas were told to lock down for 7 days, so these were eastern suburbs areas. And as the numbers grew daily, the concern increased to almost panic yesterday, and Greater Sydney, the Blue Mountains, Central Coast, Wollongong and Shell Harbour were put in a 2-week lockdown. And the question raised in the article is whatever side of the argument people fall on, now that it's in place, the question is, why wasn't the lockdown introduced sooner? However, the Premier has stressed that this was not the case and there was no political games being played. It was also reported by ABC News that she made the decision days after 4 local government authorities were locked down. The Premier said, "I do not regret a single decision we have taken, because it has been based on health advice, and also when you are making a major decision to lock down millions and millions of people, you have to make sure that it is based on health advice." But there are other issues about the lockdowns which have not been stressed throughout the mainstream media. There was no mention of the vaccinated people. We've been told that the vaccine is extremely efficable, but why do these people then still have to lock down? This is a pertinent question because if the vaccine is as efficable as we've been told, in that it both decreases the transmissibility of the virus and increases your likelihood of surviving it, then why would you have to lock down? The vaccine is meant to make you immune from the virus, and there is mounting evidence to show that vaccinated people are far less likely to transmit the virus. If you still have to lock down despite getting the vaccine, then why should you get the vaccine? It raises serious questions over whether the vaccine actually works. In a time where vaccination rates are especially low and not reaching expectations, this is no way to incentivize people to get the vaccine. If you want people to get the vaccine, then you should make it so if you get the vaccine, you can live your life normally. You should not have to lock down. You should not have to wear masks. You should be able to go about your life as you see fit. It in fact disincentivizes people, especially young and healthy people, who are already likely to be unaffected by the virus. These people see that they get treated the same way as people who haven't had the vaccine. You would think that being able to go back to normal life would be considered a pretty substantial benefit when people are deciding whether or not to get the vaccine. Because keep in mind, personal health is not the only factor considered when people are getting the vaccine. Many people are just sick of having to take these measures instated by the government and would just like to return to normal life. And with growing concerns regarding the safety of the vaccines, which we will be discussing later, the potential costs are sure to be rising inside people's heads. For sure, the benefits are not rising. And after the cost-benefit analysis, will people really think that it is more worth it to get the vaccine than not to? Current levels of vaccination show that people do not. This kerfuffle by the government will correctly lead people to posing the question, if the vaccines are so effective, then why do vaccinated people have to lock down? The second big question which is raised is, when will Australian citizens be trusted to keep their own lives in order? The coronavirus has been a massive ploy in which government bureaucratic power has been expanded all throughout the world, and Australia is no exception to this. We have seen unprecedented measures taken place where government has been able to force people to wear masks, force people to stay inside, to not compete in sports. Schools have been shut down, universities as well. And if we are going to be locking down for 100 cases out of a state with millions of population, then I'm not sure we will be able to return to normal life anytime soon. Australians, for the most part, realise the dangers of this virus, and they know what threat it poses to them. To the majority of Australians, those who are young and fit, no comorbidities, there is a very low threat that this virus poses. This is being realistic. The median age of death from the virus is higher than life expectancy. It has been that way for over a year. Regardless of how dangerous the virus is to Australians, people should be trusted to live their lives anyway. We live in Australia. This is meant to be one of the most free countries in the world. But we have not even been given the freedom to choose what we wear with respect to masks or where we travel with respect to the lockdowns. We also need to look at the economy. Australia, for the most part, has been quite lucky in that we have not experienced the same draconian lockdowns seen throughout the rest of the world, particularly in some states in the United States of America. Hence, our economy, including local businesses, have not been greatly affected on a broad scale relative to those other places. This is why we see Australia leading the world in terms of the economic recovery, with our GDP already above where it was last January. While a 2-week lockdown itself might not drive businesses out of the workplace, consumer confidence will fall, and that will have drastic effects on the economy in the medium term. Additionally, consumer confidence will remain down for quite a while, both from this lockdown and with the possibility of further lockdowns remaining in people's heads for quite some time. There is also the possibility that this lockdown will span longer if we are not able to get the cases under control. We have already seen that lockdowns are not very beneficial to keeping cases down, as they have been employed in many states throughout America, and it has not helped. Regardless of how long the lockdown lasts, if you are a small business owner, then you probably don't want the lockdown anyway. You don't want to be forced to shut down your business for 2 weeks. That's 2 weeks where you don't have income and you're still having to pay all your business affairs. Another question which is likely to be raised by business owners is, why is my business not considered essential? This was correctly raised by the governor of South Dakota over in the States, where she said she doesn't have the right as governor to choose which business is essential and which is not. If you are not deemed as providing an essential service, then you are forced to shut down your business for 2 weeks unless you can make other adjustments. And this sets a dangerous precedent whereby the government has the ability to decide if your work is essential or not, and in doing so, they can decide whether your business is able to open or not. Additionally, this use of lockdown by the Australian state governments is in direct conflict with the World Health Organization's advice on COVID lockdowns. As reported on Sky News, Dr. David Navarro of the World Health Organization has been quoted to say, "We in the World Health Organization do not advocate lockdowns as the primary means of control of the virus. The only time we believe a lockdown is justified is to buy time to reorganize, regroup, rebalance your resources, and protect your health workers who are exhausted. But, by and large, we'd rather not do it. Lockdowns just have one consequence that you must never, ever belittle, and that is making poor people an awful lot poorer." And this is something we've seen all throughout the world, where the richest few throughout the lockdowns have made huge profits, while many small businesses have been forced to close down and will never open again. Not only is this an anti-capitalist idea, as it allows for the creation of monopolies, but it is unhealthy in the free market to have such power given to just a few corporations. Now, all of this issues with the lockdowns becomes a bit more inconvenient for the Berejiklian government when you factor in that just earlier last week, the Treasurer, Dominic Perrottet, was bragging that New South Wales has demonstrated the gold standard testing, tracing, and quarantine throughout the pandemic, while simultaneously allowing their citizens to live their way of life more free. By and large, this is correct. New South Wales has been the benchmark in terms of responses to the pandemic, not only in Australia but throughout the world. However, with the issues we raised before, and this quote from the Treasurer, it can seem a bit farcical when later in the same week you send your own state into lockdown. This is where the aforementioned concerns of the Premier playing politics with the lockdown originated. Furthermore, I think that the overarching idea that the government gets to choose how you individually respond to the pandemic is flawed. If someone wants to take the risk to go outside and live their life, then they should be allowed to do so. The government should not have the ability to tell you how to dress or where you can move. This is a fundamental disruption of human rights and sets a dangerous precedent for the future. So overall, if someone wants to go outside, they should be allowed to do so. If someone doesn't, then they can stay inside and they will be fine. No one is forcing them to do anything. The government should not be saving our lives by preventing us from living our lives. Now, each of these questions stem from the one overarching principle of where do our rights as Australians originate? While this is a broad philosophical question, which I will not divulge into completely at this time, if you are of the opinion that our rights emanate from the government, and thus the government has the ability to take away our rights, then you have no avenue to complain about forced lockdowns, or mask mandates, or any of it. Because if that is the case, the government is merely executing its duty and its right by taking away your lives to protect your lives. However, if you think that your rights originate from a higher power, and hence the government's duty is purely to protect these rights, then this expansion of government power sets a dangerous precedent which is not healthy for our future as a free country. As a general rule, you should only give the government as much power as you would be comfortable it having should the opposition be in power. Now, the opposition here is not necessarily the Labour or the Liberal Party, but it is the worst case scenario party. So if you want the opposition party to be able to tell you how to dress or where you can move, then you should be happy with this precedent set by governments all throughout Australia. Keep this in mind when you decide your answer to that question. We have seen many corrupt and self-serving politicians before. And would you really want these people to be able to decide how you exercise your fundamental human rights? Because this idea has now been set. I mentioned briefly before the underwhelming vaccination levels in Australia. Well, with this outbreak of cases, it is very possible we will see these vaccination rates rise. However, the opposition leader has repeatedly criticised the vaccine rollout. He has been quoted as saying, "Mr. Morrison should have done more on the vaccine deals. He should have built national quarantine. He should have acted over a year ago." Instead, he was complacent, and it's the Australian people who suffer. Labor has a plan to beat COVID-19. Why doesn't he? This is ignoring the fact that there clearly is a plan, otherwise there would be no rollout, there would be no economic recovery, there would be no quarantine. Throughout the pandemic, quarantine has largely been delegated to the states. The economic recovery has been quite good from the Morrison government through targeted spending programs such as JobKeeper, JobSeeker, JobMaker, JobTrainer. And this is why we have seen Australia have one of the best economic recoveries of any nation following the coronavirus pandemic. With regard to the vaccine, Australia is currently in 5 separate agreements, including those with Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Moderna, and Novavax. And this is expected to total around 170 million doses of the vaccine delivered to Australia. I overlooked Albanese's plan, and it has outlined 4 goals. These are to build new quarantine facilities, fix the vaccine rollout by expanding mobile and mass vaccination clinics, start a mass public information campaign to encourage people to get vaccinated, and begin manufacturing mRNA vaccines in Australia. While these ideas are quite good from the opposition leader, he has not provided many specifics on how this will be done. And, in fact, the Liberal Party is already engaged in fixing many of these problems. It has been reported by Sky News that the Prime Minister has accused the opposition leader of playing political games with the vaccine targets, and that he is seeking to score points on an important issue. The Prime Minister went on to say that the rollout of the vaccination program is a very serious undertaking, and the mocking tone used by the leader of the opposition does him no credit. All of this is just a political game to him, a political game. He comes here seeking to score points on issues of great seriousness for the Australian people. I would invite the leader of the opposition to support the operation being led by Lieutenant General Fruin and try to refrain from his usually snarky responses.